I didn't realize something inside me had already started shifting long before I could name it. From the outside, my life looked steady, predictable in the way people admire when they say you've settled well. There were no loud arguments, no dramatic exits, no obvious cracks. Just a quiet routine that repeated itself so perfectly it stopped feeling like living and started feeling like waiting. Mornings were mechanical. We woke up at the same time, moved around each other without really seeing each other, exchanged small, functional words. Tea. Keys. You'll be late. Conversations that filled space but carried nothing. It wasn't that he was a bad man. That would have been easier. He was reliable, consistent, always there when something needed fixing. But somewhere along the way, he stopped noticing me. Not in a cruel way, just gradually. Like a habit you forget you ever had that I told myself this is what long-term love looks like. Less excitement, more stability. Less talking, more understanding. That's what everyone says. That's what I believed, or at least what I repeated often enough to stop questioning it. But there were moments, small ones, that didn't sit right. Sitting across from him at dinner while he scrolled through his phone, nodding absent-mindedly at something I said. The way silence between us felt heavier than it should. The way I stopped finishing my own sentences because I knew he wasn't really listening, that I didn't feel lonely in the obvious sense. I wasn't alone. But there was this quiet emptiness, like something important had been removed from my life and I hadn't noticed exactly when it happened, and then he appeared. That it wasn't dramatic. No music, no instant spark that screamed this is the moment everything changes. Just a normal day, like any other, interrupted by someone who looked at me a little longer than people usually do. Not in a way that made me uncomfortable, just enough to make me feel noticed. Our first conversation was simple. Polite. Forgettable, if you looked at it from the outside. But I remember the way he listened. Not just waiting for his turn to speak, not distracted, not half present. Fully there. It caught me off guard more than anything else that I didn't think much of it at first. People talk. People meet. It doesn't mean anything. That's what I told myself when I noticed I was thinking about that conversation later that evening. Not the words exactly, but the feeling of it. The ease. The way I didn't have to repeat myself or simplify what I meant. Days passed, and we crossed paths again. This time, it was easier. A little more familiar. The kind of interaction that builds quietly, without effort. A shared joke. A brief pause that lasted just a second longer than it needed to. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing I couldn't explain if someone asked, but I didn't tell anyone. That I didn't tell my partner that there was someone who made me feel awake. That word felt too strong, too dangerous. So I avoided it, even in my own thoughts. I reduced it to something smaller. Just conversation. Just a connection. Something harmless. Still, I started noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. The way my day felt slightly better when I knew I might see him. The way I caught myself wondering what he would say about something before I even spoke to him. It wasn't constant. Just occasional. But it was enough. At home, nothing had changed. That was the strange part. Everything was exactly the same. Same routines, same silence, same comfortable distance. And yet, it felt different now, not because my partner had done anything new, but because I had started noticing what wasn't there. One evening, I tried to talk. Not about anything serious. Just something small, something to bridge the gap I could feel growing wider inside me. He nodded, gave short answers, barely looked up. It wasn't intentional. I knew that. But it still landed the same way that I stopped mid-sentence and didn't continue. He didn't notice. That moment stayed with me longer than it should have. The next time I saw him, the contrast felt sharper. He asked a simple question, how my day was, and actually waited for the answer. And when I spoke, he responded in a way that made it clear he had listened. Really listened. It shouldn't have mattered so much. But it did. That I started telling myself I deserved that. Just conversation. Just being heard. There's nothing wrong with that, not yet. That phrase came quietly, almost like a whisper I didn't want to fully acknowledge. Because if there's a not yet, it means there's a line somewhere ahead. A line I hadn't crossed, but was aware of. I began to notice the space between us more when we stood close. Not touching, but aware. A kind of tension that didn't exist before. Subtle, easy to ignore if you wanted to. But impossible to unfeel once you recognized it. One afternoon, we found ourselves standing closer than usual. Nothing forced it. Just circumstance. A narrow space, a pause in conversation. I became aware of everything, the way my breath slowed slightly, the way he didn't immediately step back. For a second, it felt like time stretched. Like something unspoken was hanging between us, waiting that he didn't move closer. I didn't step away, and in that stillness, something shifted. Not visibly. Not in a way anyone else could have pointed to. But inside me, something crossed from harmless into something else. Something I couldn't quite define yet. That I broke the moment first. A small movement, a casual step back, like nothing had happened. And technically, nothing had. No words, no touch, no clear boundary crossed, but I felt it. Later that night, lying next to someone who had once made me feel everything, I stared at the ceiling and replayed that moment in my head. Not because of what happened, but because of what almost did, and for the first time, I didn't tell myself it meant nothing. That I just lay there, aware of a quiet truth I wasn't ready to say out loud. Something had already begun, even if I pretended it hadn't.
It didn't happen all at once. There wasn't a single moment where everything changed. It was quieter than that, slower, almost unnoticeable if you weren't paying attention. But I was. And I could feel it shifting every day. He stopped sounding like someone who was trying to survive a breakup. He started sounding like someone who was learning how to live again. And somehow, I was always there in the middle of it. Our conversations weren't just late-night comfort anymore. They became a part of our routine, something expected. He'd message me as soon as he woke up, sometimes before anyone else. It wasn't deep or emotional every time. Sometimes it was random, pointless, even stupid. But that's what made it feel real. It wasn't forced. It wasn't about healing anymore. It was just us. He laughed more. Not the kind of laugh people fake to move on, but the kind that comes naturally, without effort. And every time it happened, I knew I had something to do with it. That thought stayed with me longer than it should have. He didn't talk about her much anymore. When he did, it felt distant, like he was describing something that didn't belong to him the same way it used to. There was no intensity left in it. No attachment in his voice. At least, that's what I told myself. Instead, he talked about his day. About small things that didn't matter to anyone else but somehow mattered to me. Things he noticed, things he thought about, things that reminded him of something funny. And every time, he chose to tell me first. That's when I realized something I couldn't ignore. I had become the first person he thought of. It should have felt normal. Friends do that, right? They share things, they talk, they stay connected. But this didn't feel like just friendship anymore. There was something else underneath it, something unspoken but obvious. One night, he said it without even realizing how much it would affect me. He told me, "I don't think I'd be okay right now if you weren't here." I didn't respond immediately. I just stared at the message, reading it over and over like it would mean something different the next time. It didn't. It meant exactly what it sounded like, and it changed everything. I felt it in the way my chest tightened, in the way my thoughts started moving faster than they should have. It wasn't just about him needing someone anymore. It felt like he needed me. That kind of feeling is dangerous. It makes you forget where the line is. It makes you stop asking questions you probably should be asking. I told myself it still wasn't wrong. He was single. He wasn't with her anymore. Whatever this was, it wasn't hurting anyone. That's what I kept repeating every time the doubt tried to creep in, but deep down, I knew this wasn't as simple as I wanted it to be. There were moments where everything slowed down, where the conversations got softer, more personal. He'd tell me things he didn't tell anyone else. Not just about his past, but about himself. His fears, his insecurities, the things he usually kept hidden. And I listened. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Sometimes there would be silence between us, but it never felt empty. It felt full, like there was something sitting there that neither of us was ready to say out loud. Those were the moments that stayed with me the most. I started noticing the way he said my name. The way his tone changed when it was just us talking. The way he stayed a little longer in conversations even when there was nothing left to say. It wasn't obvious enough to call it something real, but it wasn't nothing either. There was one night where it almost crossed the line completely. We were talking like usual, nothing special at first. Then the conversation slowed down. The kind of quiet that feels heavier than words. He said something about how things felt different with me. Not better or worse, just different. I asked him what he meant, but he didn't answer right away. When he finally did, it was vague, like he didn't trust himself to say too much, but I understood anyway. I felt it too. For a second, I thought he was going to say something more. Something clear. Something that would force both of us to admit what was happening. But he didn't. And I didn't push him to. Maybe I was scared of what that would mean. Instead, we stayed in that space where nothing was defined but everything was felt. It was easier that way. No labels, no expectations, no responsibility for what this could turn into. I convinced myself that it was fine. That we were just close. That not everything needed a name, but the truth was, I had already crossed a line in my head. I started thinking about him differently. Not just as someone I cared about, but as someone I wanted. Not in a loud or obvious way, but in the quiet moments where my mind wandered without permission. I wondered what it would be like if things were different. If I had met him before everything fell apart. If I wasn't just the person who helped him pick up the pieces. Those thoughts didn't feel wrong at the time. They felt natural, like a continuation of everything we had already built. That's how I justified it, but there was something I couldn't ignore, no matter how much I tried to keep things simple. This didn't start as something real. It started as him being broken and me being there to fix it, and somewhere along the way, the roles got blurred because even if he wasn't with her anymore, I wasn't completely innocent in this either. I wasn't just helping him move on. I was slowly becoming the reason he didn't look back. It didn't take long for what we had to become something I started depending on. At first, it was occasional. A message here, a conversation there. But slowly, without either of us acknowledging it, a pattern formed. He became part of my day in a way that felt natural and necessary. I would catch myself waiting for his messages, rereading them when they came, noticing how even the smallest words from him carried more weight than entire conversations at home. He never tried too hard. That was the difference. There was no chasing, no exaggeration, no need to impress. He spoke with intention, and somehow that made every interaction feel more real. When he asked how I was, it wasn't a habit, it was a question he expected an honest answer to. And I gave it. I told him things I hadn't said out loud before. Not because I planned to, but because with him, silence didn't feel like protection, it felt unnecessary. He had a way of pulling the truth out without forcing it. A calm persistence. A quiet authority that made it easier to let go of the walls I didn't even realize I had built, and I let them fall. Days started to feel divided. There was the version of me that existed in my marriage, measured, careful, distant. And then there was the version of me that came alive in those conversations with him. More open. More honest. More present. I didn't question that contrast as much as I should have. Instead, I leaned into it. He began to understand me in ways that felt unsettling. He would notice things I didn't say. Pauses in my words. Shifts in my tone. And instead of ignoring them, he addressed them directly, like he saw through everything I tried to hide. It should have made me uncomfortable. It didn't. It made me feel known, and being known is addictive. At home, the distance grew quieter but heavier. My husband didn't suddenly change. If anything, he stayed exactly the same. But I wasn't seeing him the same way anymore. The gap between what I felt and what I needed became impossible to ignore. I stopped trying to bridge it. I told myself I was just tired, but the truth was, I had already started to detach. There were moments when I caught myself comparing them. Not intentionally, not out loud, but the thoughts came anyway. One listened. One didn't. One noticed. One overlooked. One made me feel like I mattered without asking for it. And once those comparisons begin, they don't stop. Our conversations deepened. What started as simple exchanges turned into something layered, something that carried meaning even in silence. There were pauses that lingered longer than necessary, words that felt heavier than they should have. It wasn't just what we said, it was what we didn't say that changed everything. He never crossed a line directly, but he stood close enough to it that I could feel it. And I didn't step back. There was a moment, small, almost forgettable on the surface, that changed the way I saw everything. We were standing closer than usual, not touching, but aware of the space between us. It wasn't accidental. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. Time didn't stop, but it slowed enough for me to feel the weight of that silence. I could have walked away. I didn't, because in that moment, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit before. I wanted this. Not just the conversations, not just the attention. Him. The way he made me feel grounded and exposed at the same time. The way his presence alone was enough to quiet everything else in my mind. That realization should have scared me. Instead, it settled in quietly, like something I had been avoiding finally finding its place. The shift after that was subtle, but irreversible. There was no need to pretend things were neutral anymore. The way we spoke changed. Softer in some ways, more direct in others. There was an understanding between us now, unspoken, but undeniable. I started to let go of the guilt in small pieces, not completely. It was still there, lingering in the background, reminding me of what I was risking. But it wasn't strong enough to stop me. Not when I finally felt something I had been missing for so long. I told myself it wasn't physical. That nothing had actually happened, but I knew better because what we had, it wasn't harmless anymore. It was intentional. Every message, every pause, every look that lasted a second too long, it all meant something. And I was no longer trying to ignore it. There was a moment, quiet and unguarded, when the words slipped out of me without planning. Not loud, not dramatic, just soft enough to carry everything I couldn't fully explain. Something that revealed more than I had intended, something that hinted at trust and surrender. I didn't take it back. He didn't question it. And in that silence that followed, I felt it clearly, the line I had been avoiding, the one I thought I still had control over. I had crossed it. Not in a way anyone else could see. Not in a way that could be proven or explained, but inside, where it mattered most, there was no doubt anymore that I wasn't just someone having conversations, that I was someone who had already chosen a direction, even if I hadn't admitted it out loud. And once that choice is made, even quietly, there's no going back to who you were before.
I didn't lose everything at once. It unraveled slowly, in ways that were harder to stop because nothing looked broken at first. For a few days, I managed to act normal. I followed the same routines, said the same things, responded the way I always had. On the surface, nothing had changed. But inside, there was a constant awareness that never left. Every word I spoke felt measured. Every silence felt louder, and the worst part was how easy it was to continue that we didn't stop talking. If anything, it became harder to pull away. There was something binding about what had happened, something that made distance feel unnatural. Like stepping back would require more effort than moving forward, but the dynamic had changed, that he wasn't the same anymore. Not distant, not cold, just different. More careful. Like he understood the weight of what we had done and didn't want to be the one to push it further. That shift unsettled me more than anything else, that I had expected things to become clearer after crossing the line. Simpler. But instead, everything felt uncertain. One message from him stayed with me longer than the rest. We should be careful. It was reasonable. Responsible, even. But it didn't feel right. Not after everything that had already happened. Careful would have meant stopping before at home. The tension I thought I had been hiding started showing in small ways. Not obvious enough to point out, but enough to feel. I was quieter. More distracted. Slower to respond. Present, but not fully there. He noticed that it wasn't immediate. Just a gradual shift in the way he looked at me, like he was trying to understand something that didn't fit. The questions started small. Casual. Easy to deflect. You seem tired. Long day. You've been on your phone a lot. Just work. Each answer came quickly, smoothly. Too smoothly, the distance between us, once subtle, became more defined. Not just emotional now, but visible. Conversations became shorter. Silences stretched longer. And for the first time, it didn't feel like something we had both accepted. It felt like something he was starting to question. One night, he didn't let it go. Is there something you want to tell me? The question landed heavier than anything he had asked before. Not because of the words, but because of the way he said them. Calm. Direct. Certain. For a second, I considered lying again. It would have been easy. Another simple explanation, another deflection. He wanted reassurance, not the truth, but something in me stopped. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the weight of carrying something that didn't belong in silence anymore. I don't know how to explain it, I said. That wasn't an answer. Not really. But it was enough. The look in his eyes changed. Not dramatically. Just slightly. Like something had shifted into place. Try, he said. There was no anger. No raised voice. Just a quiet insistence that made everything harder. That I took a breath. But the words didn't come easily. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because saying it would make it real in a way I couldn't take back. I've been talking to someone, I admitted. Silence followed. Not the kind we were used to. This one was different. Heavy. Final. How long? He asked. That I answered, and it's just talking. That question stayed in the air longer than the rest. That I could have said yes. It would have been believable enough to soften the impact. But the truth had already started coming out. Stopping halfway didn't make sense anymore. No, that was all it took. That he didn't react immediately. No anger, no outburst. Just stillness. Like he was processing something too big to respond to right away. That hurt more than anything else. I see, he said quietly. 3 words. No accusation, no demand for explanation. Just acceptance of something that had already happened. I didn't plan it, I added, the same words I had heard before, now sounding weaker when they came from me. That he nodded slightly, not agreeing, not arguing. Just acknowledging. That doesn't change anything, he said, and he was right. That in that moment, everything I had tried to separate collapsed into one reality. There was no version of events that made this smaller. No explanation that could undo the choice I had made. That we didn't argue. There was no dramatic confrontation, no emotional release. Just a quiet understanding that something fundamental had been broken. Later, when I reached out to him, the response felt different, slower, more distant. I think we should stop, he said. That an long explanation. No drawn-out conversation. Just a decision. That it caught me off guard, even though it shouldn't have. This was the logical outcome. The inevitable consequence of everything we had done, but logic didn't make it easier to accept. Is that what you want? I asked. There was a pause before he replied. It's what makes sense. That answer stayed with me longer than anything else. Not what he wanted. Not what he felt, just what made sense. And just like that, the thing that had felt so intense, so consuming, started to unravel in a completely different way. Not with drama, not with closure. Just distance. That I stood there, holding on to something that no longer existed in the same way. At home, the silence became permanent. Not uncomfortable, not tense. Just empty. Like everything that used to fill the space between us had been removed. We spoke when necessary. Shared the same environment without pretending things were normal. There was no clear resolution, no defined ending. Just a quiet shift into something unfamiliar. That I had thought the hardest part would be choosing. That I was wrong, The hardest part was understanding what that choice had turned me into. Days passed, then weeks. The intensity faded, but the awareness didn't. It stayed, settled somewhere deeper, becoming part of how I saw everything that I thought about that moment, the one I kept going back to. The day he came close. How small it seemed at the time. How easy it would have been to step back, to keep things where they were, but I hadn't, and it wasn't just that moment. It was every choice after that. Every step forward I didn't question enough that if I could go back, I don't know what I would change. That's the truth I had to live with, because it wasn't just about losing something. It was about realizing that some lines, once crossed, don't just affect your relationships, they change you, and no matter how quiet the consequences are, they stay.